Hi there, I'm Cary Millsap. There are a lot of users who suffer from performance problems while the system manager's dashboard dials are all green. Some experts suggest that to fix this kind of a problem, you've got to have people that are capable of executing basically magic. This attitude breaks my heart because for the last 25 years, I've dedicated my career to making performance optimization something that's a repeatable, teachable process that intelligent but normal people can execute. So today is all about that. What I'm going to show is why measuring and diagnosing performance shouldn't require magic. As I mentioned, I'm Cary Millsap. I'm a distinguished product manager at Oracle. I'm the author of a few books, my most recent of which is called How to Make Things Faster. It's an O'Reilly title from 2023. I've been a performance specialist since 1990. Most of that time, well, all of that time really focused on Oracle software optimization. I'm a faithful husband and father of 3, and I make award-winning museum quality aviation replicas. If you're curious about that, I've got a link at the end, but I won't slow us down by talking about it here. So this is a cover copy, a copy of the cover of my book. And one of the things that the book really pounds on is that optimizing performance is a skill that with the right tools, a regular person can be taught to master. So this is really my thesis for the day. I'm going to repeat it a couple of times, and I'm going to try to tell enough stories that you'll believe this is true by the end of my presentation. I will begin by telling a story, and specifically a horror story. It's all true. Here's where we begin. We walked into a situation where employees were literally burning the place down over the weekend. They were breaking glass. They were tearing up stuff. They were ruining their company's assets because they weren't getting paid on Fridays like they were supposed to. And they weren't getting paid on Fridays like they were supposed to because payroll, the application process, payroll, was running too slowly. And furthermore, this had been going on for over 3 months. Until finally, the company had had enough. They'd had enough vandalism and they'd had enough pain and anguish that they decided, all right, we're going to open our wallet. We're going to go ahead and spend money. Our dashboard has been telling us that we're out of CPU while we're running payroll. So we'll just upgrade our CPUs and make this problem end. They did it because that's what the dashboard told them to do. They expected that this would make payroll 1.5 times faster because the CPUs were going to be 1.5 times faster. So it's the kind of thing that you would expect people to believe. If you're going to speed up a component on the system by X, then you're probably going to have an application that's faster by X. This is a common belief, but it's rarely true. So this would save them, except it didn't. Payroll wasn't imaginarily slower. Payroll was measurably slower. It wasn't just we'd hoped it would go faster and it didn't, so now we're upset. It actually was worse. Payroll was actually slower after the very expensive upgrade. And that, of course, caused shapes like this to appear in their brains. Now, the confusing part is that their dashboard told them that while payroll was running, there was heavy CPU consumption and there were lots of latch-free wait events. Now, to an Oracle practitioner, this is kind of a pattern that's familiar. These guys even knew which latches were being contended for, and specifically, there were these latches called cache buffers chains. And everybody in the Oracle universe knows that this means high LIO SQL, and we all know what to do with high LIO SQL, right? High LIO SQL away. The problem is there was no high LIO SQL in payroll. These folks had good developers and they knew what to look for, and there was no high LIO SQL in payroll. So they were just lost. And the upgrade, the raising of hopes before announcing we're going to spend money and finally fix this, you can trust us. Well, nothing in the world seemed right after they did the upgrade and everything was slower. So things just got worse. That's chapter 1. Let's move on now to chapter 2. Let's measure and diagnose, and we'll show you what we did. Now, to start off, I'm going to give you a little secret, a little behind the scenes sauce here. Their dashboard was never going to help them solve their payroll problem. Their dashboard was never going to help them solve their payroll problem. But we solved it in less than an hour. Sounds really fun, right? Well, so what could we do that's any better than what their dashboard did? And it really boils down to 3 simple words. Look at it. And when I say it, I mean payroll. And when I say look, well, you got to wonder, what in the heck is that even supposed to mean? Of course, we're looking at payroll. Everybody was looking at payroll. But I want to look at payroll a special way. I want to see how payroll spends its time call by call. And the only way to do that, and this is whether you're talking about Oracle or anything else, the only way to find out how a program is spending its time is to trace it. So in Oracle, they've got superlative tracing operators. It really is. Oracle database is the best in the world at giving you traceability. If you're curious, I've got a book on my desk. It's not very big. You can see it's a very thin book, but it's all about Oracle tracing. And if you're curious, you can find it at Amazon. But trust me, Oracle's got a really, really nice tracing feature. And so making tracing happen was really just a conversation with the client. And there are a few of us sitting in a room with no windows. And we asked the person that had sponsored our visit, so when, is the next time you'll run payroll? And he laughed, he chortled, and he said, we're always running payroll. We run it 24/7 and we get further behind every day. And we said, you're running payroll right now? And he said, right now. We are running payroll right now. And we said, well, do you mind if we trace it for, I don't know, maybe a half hour or so? And he said, sure, here's our DBA, just tell him what you need. So we got him to trace, and after a half hour, we got stuff that looks like this. I believe it was 70 megs of this. So you've got a right to ask, this is a morass of data. How is that going to help anybody? And the answer is it needs to be aggregated in a particular way in order to become helpful. And so this is the way that we need to aggregate that trace data. And this is what we call, and this is a trademark of a company that I ran before I joined Oracle Corporation, a receipt for response time. It's just like what you get at a restaurant when you wonder, why was my bill $400? It's like, well, you had 30 bottles of beer and that adds up. So this receipt for response time basically aggregates by subroutine call name. And one of the things that Oracle is really good at is naming the subroutines that it's calling. So basically all these things are things that payroll does in order to make up half an hour. And this 1,957.47 seconds, that denominator, or that sum at the bottom of the duration column, is that half hour that we traced payroll. So look at this way. So what's the problem? Well, the dashboard said it was CPU. What do you think? Do you think the problem's CPU? Is CPU the reason that payroll is not running any faster? CPU only contributes 12.7% of the total response time that payroll consumed when we traced it. It also said latch free was a problem. Is latch free a problem for payroll? Because it only accounts for 1.2% of the total half hour, right? 23 seconds out of a half hour is virtually unnoticeable. I'll say it another way. 1900 seconds minus 23 seconds is still 1900 seconds. So it's neither of these things. It's this thing at the top. There's a subroutine called SQLnet message from client. And when you see that, you can look up what it means. It doesn't really matter here until a couple of slides from now. But basically, anybody that looks at this receipt for response time, because it is sorted in descending order of duration of subroutine call, we can see, I don't know what this is necessarily, but I know we need to focus on it. So an observation that you should be able to make about a receipt for response time is that duration, this green number here, the 984, is equal to the count times the mean. The duration equals the count times the mean. That means that the count and the mean are the only two ways you can influence a duration. The only way you can make this green number change is to either change this number or that number, a count or a mean. And so I'll net it out for you if you're looking at the recording later and want to remember why this is important. The only way to influence the total duration number, this number at the bottom, is by manipulating one or more of these numbers. Since these numbers are sorted, we want to focus at the top. Just like in a real receipt, if it were sorted, we'd focus at the top. And the only way to influence one of these numbers in this column is by changing either a count or a mean. So in that sense, count and mean are the only two knobs you can turn, ever. Doesn't matter if we're talking about Oracle or some other kind of a system. Now, with such a receipt, you can predict impact. And this is what makes business decision makers happy, because they went off and they spent a bunch of money upgrading CPUs. If they'd seen this receipt for response time, they would have known not to expect very much impact in upgrading the CPUs. Now, performance actually got worse because of the CPUs, and we'll talk about that later in the Q&A if you're interested. But for now, I want to show you this magical thing. I use the word magic in the title, and I'm using it a different way here. This kind of a statement is magical for a business to be able to say. If you change this count or that mean, then duration will change by this delta. And that's the kind of sentences we can say once we've seen our data in this receipt for response time format. And once we realize that the green number is equal to this 95,000 count times this 10 millisecond mean. So no more guessing, and especially no more months of guessing. So here we go. Measuring and diagnosing performance shouldn't require magic. Now, hopefully that rings a bell because that's the title of my talk. So let's recap really quick what we mean by measuring and diagnosing and what I've shown so far. So measuring is really a list of one thing. Trace it. Don't think about it. Don't wonder if we should trace it. Don't try some other stuff and then trace it. Just skip right to the step where you trace it. No magic required. No thought required. If it's hard to trace, okay, maybe there's going to have to be some intellectual capital expended to make the trace occur. But if you have a tracing feature, use it. Don't think about it. Trace. Now, diagnose is a little bit of a longer list, but what diagnose is, well, we want to turn that trace data into a receipt for response time that we can make sense of, right? We want durations equals call counts times latencies for every kind of thing that happens in that 30 minutes of watching payroll run. So we want to aggregate that trace into a receipt for response time. The top lines are the most important ones. If we've sorted by descending order of duration, the top lines are the important ones to look at first. And there's no magic there. It's the same every single time. Trace it, receipt for response time, top lines are your problem. Now, if you do this, you end up with this. Again, I use the term magic. There's no magic in the process, but there is magic in the result. If you change this count or that mean, then duration will change by delta. So let's talk about the end of the horror story real quickly. Here's what happened. This is the receipt for response time. Remember, there are only two knobs to turn. There's count and there's mean. So let's look first at the count. And I'm not going to cover it in detail here today, but it's much better if you can reduce a count than if you can reduce a mean. And there's lots of conversation behind that. If you want to talk in the Q&A, I'll be happy to. But there are only two knobs, count and mean. Let's look first at the count and see if there's any leverage there. Well, the problem is that payroll is pre-packaged. We can't change the source code. We can't make it execute any fewer network IOs, which is what the SQLnet message thing is. It's a count of network round trips. And there's no way to reduce that number of round trips because the application's prepackaged and there's no knob for changing the application's network IO call counts. So there's really no leverage in this particular story in the count column. In a lot of stories, there is leverage there. So that's always where we want to look first. But here, sorry, there's nothing we could do to the count. So if we're going to make payroll faster by an appreciable amount, it's going to have to be in this mean column. It's going to have to be, is this 10 milliseconds a bad number? And as it turns out, it is, because the database and the payroll program were on the same server. One person on the team recognized, hey, why are we doing 10 millisecond round trips between a machine and itself? And we did a test that showed that, hey, if we connect a different way to the database, it's just a configuration parameter change, then we can get a 50 times 55 times better latency here than what we're getting. So we ran a little test, proved that, and figured out, okay, what do we have to do to make that change in production? And here's what will happen if you will make this change in production. So this is the thing where we say response time will change, or total duration will change by this much. And in this case, it will change by about 1,000 seconds if we can reduce the mean latency per network round trip by a factor of 55. So this was our analysis. This is all done in Excel. This is us saying, okay, if I can make this number here into that number there, then these numbers will change in this way. And the company decided to do it, but we had to wait a couple of days because of change control. So we spent a couple hours on site collecting data, making this recommendation. Then we went back to the office, and a couple of days later, we got a phone call, and it was great news. Payroll throughput's more than double because, as you saw, we cut response time for payroll in half, and that's it. That's exactly what we needed. The end. Okay, it is the end of that particular story, but there are a couple of loose ends that I'd like to tie up for you, because you're probably wondering, why was their dashboard such a problem? I called it futile, right? I said their dashboard was never going to help them fix their payroll problem. And I want to explain to you why. So here's the problem. The problem is that the dashboard used a harmful definition of the term bottleneck. What they defined bottleneck as was a system bottleneck, which was basically a measurement of everything that was happening on the machine while payroll ran, and was calculated as the system's largest response time contributor while payroll was running. Now, the problem with that is that largest response time contributor is not necessarily what's causing payroll specifically to struggle. In other words, payroll's workload character could be totally different from the average workload character of the overall system, which was running lots of other programs while payroll was running. That's why they saw latch free when payroll wasn't using latches. It's because other programs that were running on the system were using a lot of latches. The problem is fixing those doesn't fix the business problem of people burning down the place because they're not getting paid on time. So what we need is not what we were getting from the dashboard. And the dashboard ended up being confusing, unreliable, and it literally led to months of anguish. And a lot of places that my team and I have gone over the past 25 years have suffered from this exact phenomenon. They buy these tools with these expensive dashboards, and the dashboards end up being confusing, unreliable, and leading to months of anguish. So on the right-hand side, we've got space for what you should be measuring, and that is the business bottleneck, right? The system will tell you I'm doing a lot of CPU stuff, but payroll wasn't doing a lot of CPU stuff. And which of those two things do you think we need to be looking at? Overall business or payroll? Well, the answer is we need to be looking at payroll. So the bottleneck for a program execution is simply its largest response time contributor. It's the top line in a receipt for response time. So it's always at the top of that receipt if that receipt's sorted in descending duration order. And that's easy, simple, easy to teach. It's reliable, it works all the time, and it's always harmonious with business priority. You know, the ironic thing is their upgrade actually did help some programs run more quickly, but those programs weren't important to the business because payroll was so important to the business at the time. So that's the big deal about what we did, is we measured payroll, not the whole system. And I'd recommend if you have a dashboard that looks at your whole system, you remember this after this presentation. It will help you solve certain types of problems. It also can prevent you from solving certain types of problems by embedding things in your brain that you should look at a little differently than what you're accustomed to. So let me wrap up. Optimizing performance is a skill that with the right tools, a regular person can be taught to master. Now, of course, there's a mouthful in the term with the right tools. With Oracle, the tracing feature that they have is an essential tool, and the aggregating tool that we used. And by the way, I didn't mention it at the mark where I put this on a slide, but if you visit methodr.com, method-r.com, you can actually download and use the tool that converts trace data into a receipt for response time. It only works for Oracle, but that's at least an existence proof that it can work for other types of systems as well. So here's a summary of the method that I'm advocating for. When we measure, we trace, always. Don't think about it. Trace data is my first line of defense in trying to figure out why some program is spending time. Why do I want to focus on a specific program? Because I want to make sure that I'm in lockstep with business priority. There may be 6 problems, but I want to make sure that I solve the right one first. And I do that by looking at the most important execution first, not just throwing solutions at the system and hoping some of them stick to the right programs that I'm hoping get fixed. So number 1, trace always. Number 2, create that receipt for response time. Here's the URL, methodr.com. It'll tell you everything you need to know. And then the solution step is only ever one of 2 things. You can either reduce a count or a mean for some of the calls that are at the top of your receipt. Those are the only things you can do. If you've done things in the past that were different from that, I promise you the things that you've done can be couched in the terminology that I'm showing here. Lots of things that I haven't talked about, and I'm happy to. So I'll leave a little bit of space for the Q&A, but these are all things that you can find in the book or that I'll be happy to talk with you about after the presentation. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to contact me or if you'd like to read more, here I am, Cary.millsap@oracle.com. You can see things about hobbies and such at CaryMillsap.com, and you can reach me on X at CaryMillsap. And these are some other books that I've written some of the same principles that we're talking about here. The book on the far right is from the year 2003 about Oracle. The 2 books in the middle are much more recent. They focus on Oracle trace data in particular. And the book on the left is really for anybody who wants to either understand or explain why things take the time that they do. The one on the left called How to Make Things Faster is not an Oracle specific book. So if you're interested in what I've talked about today, hopefully you'll investigate these. Again, thanks very much. I'll hope to see you again soon.